Hey, good evening. It is 7 o'clock. So we're going to go ahead and start our August episode of the Kansas 4-H Equine webinar series. Tonight's presentation is going to be about Western pleasure, and we are happy to welcome back Dr. Kelsey Crabtree, who will present to us tonight. Kelsey is currently our Kansas State University horse judging team coach, and also is an instructor on campus with K-State. I'm going to let Kelsey share with you a little bit more about her background. If you were with us when she presented before, you probably recognize her and you may know her, but she comes to us with a wealth of expertise. We're excited to have her. We are recording once again this evening. As you're joining us, please make sure that you turn off your videos and turn your microphones to mute. We will open up for questions at the end of tonight's presentation. You are welcome to put them into the chat throughout the presentation, and we'll ask them out loud to Dr. Crabtree at the end of the presentation and give you a chance for questions then as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Crabtree.
Thank you very much, Kelsey. Like Kelsey said, I'm an instructor in the animal science department, as well as the horse judging team coach. I also come from a horse show background. I did 4-H and FFA all through my youth and high school and so forth. I also showed both paint horses and quarter horses all through my youth and some into college, but now I predominantly just show paint horses throughout the Midwest and continue my job at K-State. And I'm also very involved in a couple other breed shows and different things like that. So hopefully what I'm going to talk about tonight is something that interests all of you. And I love talking about Western pleasures. I think it's one of my favorite classes to not only show in, but talk about, to judge and so forth. So I'm really excited to get the opportunity to talk about this tonight. And like Kelsey said, feel free to ask questions throughout, and I will be happy to answer those at the end. So first, what is Western pleasure? I think there are a lot of misconceptions about Western pleasure and the discipline and the class itself, but it is a Western discipline rail class. So my picture's a little blurry here, darn it, but Western meaning they are in Western attire, and we do Western gaits. So walk, trot, lope, extended trot, different things like that. And this is a class for all breeds. So you will see this class in at paint horse shows, at quarter horse shows. They have different versions at Arabian shows, at all different kinds. So you will see this at your 4-H shows. You're going to see this class at multiple different events. The criteria and some different things that we judge on may differ a little bit for those types of breeds, but the basis of the class is across, all different kinds. And it's based on the horse being a pleasure to ride, hence the name Western pleasure. So you're going to see these horses that are going around the pen at a slow pace. They, for the most part, are very comfortable to ride. So we want them to have that look as well, because they should be a pleasure. They should be easygoing, and the riders and the horses should make the job look very easy. So now the class itself, because this is a rail class, we do have all of the horses in the arena at once. Now, if you go to some big shows, they may have to do cuts depending on how big the classes are. But at your local shows, local breed shows and things like that, all of the horses will come into the pen at once. So you may see a range of 4 to 5 horses, 10 horses, sometimes 12, 15, and so forth. That also really depends on the size of the arena. Like I said, in some of those big breed shows, The arena is not only really big, so we will actually start doing cuts at like 24. So if there's more than 24 horses or so in the class, they will just have to do multiple goes. And then we are judging them each direction on the rail. So the horses will first, for the most part, it can vary. They can go left or right first, but they will show both directions. That is a class rule. And you have to show, excuse me, each gait, each direction for the class to be complete. So it's judged at the walk, jog, extended jog, lope, and also there has to be a back in there as well. And like I said earlier, sometimes you hear people say trot. In most breed rule books and things like that, it does say jog. So don't be fooled if you hear those things used interchangeably a little bit. Before I move on to just required gaits a little bit more, I do want to talk just briefly about this class. Like I said, I really like the Western Pleasure. Hopefully I'm going to clear up some misconceptions about this class tonight and some of the things that I like to see and some of the things that hopefully this class is going towards in the future. Like I said, I think that sometimes in the past, we have seen some things that are maybe not so great about this class, and we hear lots of people talk negatively about that, and hopefully we can get some of that cleared up tonight. Now, required gaits, of course, the walk is required, so horses have to show at the walk both directions, and it is a 4-beat gait, meaning all 4 feet will hit the ground at separate times, and you should be able to count 1, 2, 3, 4. Each time one of their feet hit the ground. And it is forward moving, but we do not want it to be fast. It's going to be a pretty leisurely pace. This picture is a pretty good example of a horse that it just looks very calm, very quiet. The rider is able to have him on a long drape of rein and, just walking along at a leisurely pace. And we will do this both directions. The next one is the jog. So it is a 2-beat gait, and you will see diagonal pairs. So based off the picture in the right-hand corner, you want the diagonal pairs to be hitting the ground at the same time. So in this picture, the left hind and the right front will be hitting the ground at the same time. So that's the first beat. And then the right hind and the left front will then hit the ground at the same time. That's the second beat. So you should be able to count 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, and so forth for those diagonal pairs. We want it to be very cadenced, like I said, and so that you're able to count those that 2 beat through the diagonal pair. And then we also want to have equal strides. So we talk about seeing symmetric and asymmetric a little bit when we are looking at the jog. So we want the strides, and like again, this picture is a good example. We want the hind legs, that split between the hind legs and the split between the front legs to be equal. So it is possible for horses to take shorter strides on their hind ends than their front end or vice versa. So ideally, we want them to be equal though. We want that distance to be equal. And here's just a couple more examples of this. So like I said, the roan horse on the left, that's a great example of this split between those 2 hind legs is an equal distance, just like the split on the front legs as well. And same thing with our black horse. Now, these two have shorter distances, like the roan horse is taking shorter steps than the black horse on the right, but they're still remaining equal. So we want that symmetric distance between the 2 strides. Okay, the next required gait is the extended jog. Now, this can be, a lot of times you may only see this happen one time. So the extended jog actually only needs to be shown one direction. And then this is actually in some classes and some breed associations is not a required gait, it's an optional. So you'll just have to check your rule book. And some do not require the extended jog, some require it only one direction. But the extended jog is once again a 2-beat gait, and we want to see the horse increase the stride length, but not necessarily their speed. So sometimes when you hear extended, you think that we may need to just speed up or go a little bit faster. But actually what we're looking for is for that stride length to increase both the front and the hind, but you're still going to see it with the diagonal pairs, and you still want it to be very cadenced. So let me go back a slide here. By extending the jog, we want to see this horse taking bigger strides, but not faster, with both the front and the hind legs. Okay, and then we have the lope. This is our 3-beat gait. And so what we will see if we look at our picture here, the horses will first take the first beat. So that first where you would count 1 from their hocks. So in this particular example of this horse loping in the left lead, and I know this because of the left front leg that is coming forward. So the right hind, where the purple mark is, will hit the ground. It will actually come up underneath the horse. It will hit the ground first. So that's your first beat. And then the left hind and the right front will then come forward and hit the ground together. That's beat number 2. And then your third beat will be the left front. So then it would be like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And you should be able to count that when you're seeing a horse lope. Now that obviously may be faster or slower or so forth, but that's the 3-beat that we're talking about. Also with the lope, we are really looking for, in terms of movement, a lot of drive from that hock. So that's like the engine of the horse. That's what's giving all of its power so that it's able to lift its back up, elevate its shoulders, and be able to perform this gait like desired. And then also, of course, I briefly touched on, we do have leads in this. So we do have a right lead and a left lead. So when you're in the left lead, the inside front leg will be the one that's reaching forward. So if you are in a Western pleasure class and you have your right shoulder to the rail, when asked to lope, you will lope in the left lead. And then when you change directions and you have your left shoulder on the rail, the right front leg is then the one that's on the inside of the arena to the inside. So that means you will need to be in the right lead going in that direction. Okay, and then lastly, the back. It's exactly what it sounds like. We want to see these horses not necessarily move back incredibly fast, but definitely should have a fluid backward movement. We want to see them be responsive and fluid and also straight. And sometimes you will see this on the rail, or the exhibitors may be asked to come into the middle of the arena, and then the judges will ask them to back one by one. That just kind of depends on the show, depends on their preferences, but either one will be fine as long as the back is performed at some point in that class. And usually it's done at the very end. So you'll walk, jog, and lope both directions, and then you'll be asked to back at the end of the class. 99% of the time, that's how it will be asked to be done. Okay, so now I want to talk a little bit more about the actual judging criteria of the Western Pleasure and kind of what judges are looking for when we are when we're doing this class. And I'll talk a little bit about some differences in this criteria, maybe what you'll see at the 4-H level versus like what you would see at a breed show and so forth. But we, for the most part, use these 4 things to judge every single Western Pleasure class, no matter if it's a 4-H, if it's an Arabian show, if it's a quarter horse show, and so forth. We try to stick with the same criteria. So first one is consistency, and I'm going to split these up and talk about them a little bit more individually. But first one, most important, consistency. Then we're going to talk about movement, the actual movement of the horse itself. Then we'll talk about some brokenness and functional correctness. And then lastly, I want to briefly touch on degree of difficulty for this class and kind of what that looks like. So the first one, like I said, is consistency. It is the most important criteria that we have when we're judging this class. And what this relates to is essentially the overall performance of the horse, also their frame that they maintain throughout the class, and then their pace as well. So when I talk about consistency, this means to me that this horse and rider maintain that same look the entire class. So if I see a horse, they're jogging, they're doing exactly what they need to, they're on a long drape of rein, the rider is not having to touch them or pull on them or anything like that. If I look away for a minute and I look back and that horse remains in that exact same picture, that's what I call consistency. They'll do this at all 3 of the gaits. And so I'm going to talk about just a little bit more briefly about each one of these. So when I talk about frame, I'm talking about the top line of the horse, their headset, and also their self-carriage throughout the class. So head carriage, there's kind of an example over here in the bottom right-hand corner. We want them to be relaxed. We want it to be level from poll to withers or slightly below. So this horse is just slightly below, and that's okay. So when I say withers, I kind of want to look at right where the end of her show pad is, and I would draw a straight line out. So like I said, this horse is a little bit below, but that's okay. Maybe another good thing is we can say pull to the top of the ears. That's okay. And it should be perpendicular to the ground with their nose slightly in front of the vertical. So we want that neck to kind of remain flat, perpendicular across. And then also with the nose slightly in front of the vertical. So this horse, once again, is a good example. If I kind of draw a line down its forehead, I want its nose to be just a little bit in front of that or directly vertical. So I don't want its nose all the way to its chest or behind vertical. To me, that kind of signals that there might be something going on. So this is a great example right here in the bottom corner of kind of ideally what we're looking at. Now, that's not to say that a horse can't be ridden on a little bit tighter rein. So this horse in the corner has a long drape of rein. You can have contact, and more than likely you're going to see that in some of our local shows, 4-H shows and things like that. That's okay to have contact with your horse, but what we don't want is to have too much where we're actually behind the vertical, or we're making that horse's neck really high up in the air and so forth. Also, kind of with their top line, we want everything to stay very flat all the way across throughout the class. I don't want its neck to come up or its head to come up and so forth. So we want a pretty straight top line all across. I mean, like I said, we want this to be the same at every gait. So if I were going to call this horse consistent, every time I look at him at the walk, at the jog, at the lope, this horse will maintain that carriage throughout the whole entire class. That to me is a very consistent individual. Now more on, we can talk about our pacing being consistent, or sorry, just hold on, let me back up on here. We also talk about self-carriage and pace and different things like that, being consistent. So same thing with pace. If a horse has its pace set at the jog and that's where he's going to stay, unless called for, I want that horse to stay the same. I don't want him speeding up or slowing down. I don't want him changing his stride lengths or anything like that. And like I said, unless it's asked for. Same thing at the lope. I want him to remain at that same pace, have that same look throughout the whole class. So that's, to me, why consistency kind of engrosses all of the things, because to be consistent, your horse has to be very broke. It has to be very well trained. It has to be experienced and quiet and so forth. So that's why we're looking at consistency as the most important thing in this class. And then we move to movement. So we're going to talk about movement a little bit more specifically and kind of some of what those ideals are. We want distinct gaits. So talking about if a jog is a 2-beat gait, I want to make sure that I can count 1, 2, 1, 2 of those diagonal pairs. Same thing with the lope. It's a 3-beat gait. I should be able to count 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Now, if there's anything other than that, that to me is it's not correct. So sometimes we see horses that we call them, and we say that they're 4-beating, meaning that we can actually count a 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. That's not correct, right? So we want them to be very distinct gaits. It should be easy for you to count, whether it's a jog or a lope or even a walk and so forth. We also want it to be very cadenced, very rhythmic and collected as well. And so by collection and self-carriage, I want that horse to have its back up. I want it exhibiting those types of characteristics, and we're going to talk about those more in depth. And I do have some examples to show you as well as we move forward. So when we talk about kind of the two individual pieces of the horse, we kind of have to look at the hindquarters and then also the forehand as well. So when I talk about drive and engagement, I want those hind legs of the horse to drive under their belly. So if we're in a left lead lope, for example, I want the right hind, when it takes that first beat, to be up under the belly of the horse. And then you're going to see the left hind come up even further as well. That's what's giving the horse all of its power. And because those two hind legs are coming up underneath their belly, it helps them lift their back. Now, another instance where you might see this is if a horse is bucking, they're going to do the same things. They're going to bring their hind legs under them. They're going to lift their back. And essentially, that's how a horse gets their power to buck. So it feels a little funny the first time you feel a horse doing this properly, actually driving its legs underneath of it, lifting its back, and having that self-carriage. You will feel them be able to lift their back. And sometimes it feels like they're going to buck a little bit. But we want that engagement and we want them to have that drive, because when we lift the back, that also helps the forehand, our two front legs, to have a much freer and flatter motion. And so they'll be able to get a little bit more reach on the front end and also hit the ground a lot lighter. So sometimes we talk about a horse being very heavy on the forehand. And what we mean by that is it looks like the horse is like pounding the ground with the front end. That's the opposite of what we want. We want them to be very light, very soft. So like I said, when I show you some examples here, that should be, hopefully that's something that you're able to see. So drive from behind, and we want some reach and a freer, flatter shoulder on the front hand. And when we have those things, that's what we can call self-carriage. Self-carriage then is the ability for that horse to do it on its own throughout the class without the rider having to physically put them there or hold them there. So to me, that is the most difficult thing of this class, is to be able to have self-carriage, because the horses are doing it all on their own, or in theory they should be. So they have to do it all on their own. They have to be strong enough and in good enough shape to do this throughout the class and maintain that consistency throughout. This is why I think Western Pleasure is one of the hardest classes that you're going to see. Okay, so a couple examples here, and hopefully this works. Pause this here. Okay, so let's go back to this. Need to change my screens here. Okay, so a great resource if you ever want to use this is AQHA, the American Quarter Horse Association, does a lot of educational videos on YouTube. So they did a series of a judge's perspective where they actually have, and you're going to hear this, a professional judge talk through different classes, why they liked the horse, what they were looking for. And so this is a great resource if you're ever interested in more.
Impression. I'm already drawn into this sorrel mare.
So this is from the 2015 World Show. This is an extended jog. And they're going to show this horse at all of the gates, and I'll let you listen to the judge and kind of what they actually talk about 2 horses in this class. But this is a great video to watch when we're looking at the ideal Western Pleasure horse. Now, of course, you're not going to see this quality at 4-H shows and local shows and things like that, but this is ideally what we want our Western Pleasure horses to be like. This is what we're shooting for.
The walk is the sorrel mare for me. The profile is a ground covering walk, is meeting our rule requirements. Again, you know, it is a ground covering walk, self-carriage, looking through the bridle. I love her profile. Self-carriage, so much flow, such a great profile. Here's an example of 3 of the nicest horses in the pen. All flow, all self-carriage. The red mare, the profile, the top line is, he looks like he's trying to win. All 3 of these are great examples. Again, I'm so drawn into these 3. I mean, they are definitely trying to win. The self-carriage, very, very nice. Love the forward, love the staying slow strided, slow gaited. I think this is a good example of what I feel like were my top pair that I struggled with, who was a winner, and I feel like they both are jogging, meeting their diagonals, a slow, rhythmic 2-beat gait. I feel like the red mare, he's really trying to win. I mean, he is showing to win.
You can finish and go back and watch those if you want to. I did post another video here for you if you want to go and look on YouTube and watch those a little bit more in depth. There's 2 examples there, but those are 2. That video is a great example of ideal movement that we're looking for in our Western pleasure class at both the walk, jog, and the lope. So next thing I want to talk about is brokenness, and the next slide here is functional correctness. But when I talk about brokenness, this to me is how well the horse performs, the manners overall throughout the class, and then also the responsiveness as well to the rider. So we are looking to see that horse's attitude. Was it grumpy? Was it being able to be ridden on a long drape of rein? Did you have to see the rider really pulling on the reins? Or was that horse responding to all of those subtle aids and cues? Did the rider have its hand down at the horn the entire time and you barely had to see them move their feet or their legs and so forth? And also the smooth transitions between those different gaits. So from the walk to the jog, from the jog to the lope. Did the horse lope off as soon as the rider asked? Did it maintain its frame? Did it throw its head up in the air and so forth? And then that kind of goes along with the next one of our functional correctness. And essentially what functional correctness is did they follow the rules of the class? And did they do them correctly? So here's also where we look at kind of our manners and obedience as well. Obviously, if a horse is kicking out or bucking or having some kind of obedience issues or manners issues, that horse will need to go towards the bottom of your class. That's a big no-no here. As well as, did they perform the correct gaits and did they perform the correct leads? So if a jog is asked for and that horse is loping the entire time and never jogs, that's a functional correctness issue. And chances are that horse will, if you were to breed show, would be disqualified from the class. Same thing with the correct leads. If the horse should be loping in a left lead and it's loping in the right lead, that's a big problem. So it's important to know the rules of the class, to follow them, and as well as kind of know some of those basics so that you aren't getting yourself in trouble through this. And then lastly, I have on here is degree of difficulty. So you've heard me talk about pace and speed a little bit. And this is why I have this kind of as the last criteria, because to me, a horse that follows all of those other things that we just talked about, and if they're moving a little bit faster, they're loping a little bit faster, that's okay in my book. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this specifically is because the video that I just showed you is obviously from the American Quarter Horse World Show. So that is the top level, right? You are not going to see that at a local show or a 4-H show or probably even a local breed show. So I want to make it very known that just because a horse is going slow does not mean it's going to win a Western pleasure class. In my book, it has to have all of those other great criteria and following all of those criteria. And then if they happen to be going slow, or at a more desirable pace, because going slower is harder, much harder, especially at the lope, then that's like the cherry on the top for me. Also the rein length, which I kind of talked about. If that horse is not only consistent, if it's broke, if it has functional correctness and so forth, and the rider is able to give them a big drape of rein, that's like a cherry on the top for me as well. If the horse needs a little bit of contact from the rider, but is still very consistent, very quiet, very broke, and so forth, that's not going to be a negative for me. And then lastly, the cues from the rider. Sometimes you'll see, and especially in transitions, that sometimes the horses need a little bit of help from the rider. So sometimes you do see them pick up the reins a little bit. Sometimes you see them moving their bodies with their feet and so forth. If the rider is able to do that very subtly so that you can't see it at all, once again, that's like a cherry on the top for me. So that's why I'm putting degree of difficulty at the bottom, or the last criteria, because I want to make sure that for Western pleasure, like I said, going slow is not just the most important thing. There are lots of other things that we look for when we're talking about this class in general. So the last thing that I want to do here, I do have another example. I think that's what this YouTube video is. But we want to find that ideal pleasure horse that has the combination of all of those things that we just talked about. So number one being consistency. That is the most important thing. Then we look at movement. Then we look at brokenness, functional correctness, and then lastly, the degree of difficulty. So this YouTube video, let me get it pulled up here really quick. Actually, I'm going to go to the next YouTube video. And so very quickly, I want to look at, I put up a couple other resources here. I'm going to go to this YouTube video instead, just because I don't want to take up too much of your guys' time tonight. But the AQHA Ride the Rail Western Pleasure is another great resource that the AQHA put out. And it brought together multiple trainers talking about this class, talking about the different gaits and so forth. And it is an awesome resource. But what I wanted to do now is talk you through a Western pleasure class of what you might see more kind of at our local levels. And just so that you can kind of see the differences of these horses. And I can talk you a little bit how I would kind of judge this class and the differences between them. So we have our number one horse, has a drape of rein. We're looking at that very forward walk. This looks great, has a great top line and frame, not going too slow, not going too fast. And overall just looks like, very content and happy. We move up to the jog, very distinct 2-beat gait, has lots of cadence and rhythm. Once again, the frame stayed the same. Horse has its ears forward. It looks happy. The rider isn't having to do anything with him, pull on him, move his hands around or his feet around or anything like that. So this is a great example of walk and a jog as well. And then we go back down to the walk. Okay, this is our horse number two. Once again, I really like the overall picture of this horse on a big drape of rein, has a very level frame, nose or just in front of the vertical, and we're walking forward. This is once again another great pace. And the rider's going to ask him to jog off here. Once again, 2-beat gait, very cadenced, very rhythmic. I would say this one's a little bit faster. So I would say he's a little faster legged, meaning compared to our first horse, how it was more like a 1, 2, 1, 2. This horse is more like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So just moving at a little bit faster cadence, but nothing wrong with that. That's just how that horse moves. So then we're going to move to our black horse here. You can see that this rider is riding her horse on a little bit tighter rein, and that's okay. That's not offensive to me at all. A little bit, head is a little bit low, but once again, that's okay, especially here at the walk. At the jog here, this to me is not quite a cadenced trot or jog. If you look at our diagonal pairs, the front foot is actually hitting a little bit sooner on the ground than the hind. So that's something that we do not want to see. We want to see those pairs hitting together. And then lastly, we're going to move to our gray horse. A little bit longer drape of rein than our 3-horse, the black horse. Once again, great frame, great top line. Then we'll ask to move up. And same thing as the last one. Our front legs are hitting a little bit faster than the hind legs. The rider's having to kind of pull on him just a little bit. And also what I'm seeing with this is kind of an example of when I was talking about the front legs look like they're just hitting the ground really hard. So with our gray horse, he's just a little bit heavier. So now we can see all of the 4 of them together. And hopefully you can kind of pick out those differences of these 4. But once again, all of these horses are very broke. They are 1 and our 2 horse are very consistent. You know, they're not requiring a lot of aids from the rider. But hopefully side by side, especially if you compare like the 1 horse to the 4 horse, hopefully you see some big differences between there. Okay, I just want to watch. I want to show you them all at the lope, and then we'll be ready for some questions. Sorry, I keep getting text messages on my computer. Let me back this up just a second. Okay, so consistency. This horse's frame is the exact same. The guy has not moved at all. We have a lot of drive from that hind end. We have a very clear 3-beat gait. And we have a great free shoulder, a lot of self-carriage. The guy did have to touch him just a little bit, but still, for the most part, that horse stayed the exact same thing. And he looked very similar as he did from the jog to the lope. Now we go to our 2 horse. Once again, great top line, lots of consistency here. I'm going to say this horse is once again just a little bit quicker legged. And so that 1, 2, 3, if you count them, are just happening a lot faster. Our black horse here, once again, ridden on a little bit tighter rein, but not bad by any means. That's still acceptable. Not a lot of drive from the hind end. We kind of look like we're skipping around a little bit. And then also pretty heavy on the forehand as well. And then we're going to move to our gray horse. Frame is still great. However, struggling a little bit with the movement, right? Kind of having a little bit harder time with our 3-beat gait. And then we're going to look at all 4 of them together here next to each other. So our 1 horse compared to like our 4 horse, very consistent, obviously very broke. We have that drive and that self-carriage so that that horse is able to lope forward with a lot of drive from its hocks. And it really just looks like a pretty picture, right? That's our ideal. Okay, So then what they'll do is they'll switch and they'll go the other direction and they do the same things, but I'm not going to make you sit here and watch that the whole time. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint here. And then, like I said, this is another great example for the AQHA educational event that they put out. And so if you have time to watch some of those, that's another great resource. So I've been talking long enough. Do I have questions? I see a couple in the chat.
Yes, Kelsey. So you addressed the question about.
Okay, first question, could you explain what a judge will look for in the extended jog? Did I answer your question well enough, Yvonne? And then do you deduct for posting in the extended jog? So in our Western classes, we do not want you to post. If you are in like a ranch class or in an English class, yes, posting is acceptable. But in the Western class, no, we do not want you to post. Good question. Whoops.
Okay, any other questions for Dr. Crabtree this evening? Okay. We'll give you just a couple more minutes in case you have a couple that you're thinking of to put in the chat. If you think of them later on, feel free to email those to me and I can get them to Dr. Crabtree for you. I would encourage you to visit the State Fair Horse Show, which happens the second weekend of the State Fair, to get an idea of what our judges are looking for. And as always, visit any horse show that you can visit and ask the judges questions. Caitlin asks, when you train, do you recommend using a martingale?
Well, lots of depends on that kind of question. A martingale can certainly be a great training tool. In my opinion, that's something that you can use to teach a horse, but it's something that you should not rely on. So if you want to practice at home with one, that's great. But in my opinion, by the time you go to a show, your horse should be able to do well in this class, should be able to be ridden without one pretty consistently, because you don't want your horse essentially dependent on that training tool. But yes, it certainly can be a helpful tool.
See, and Abigail asks, do you have to wear a hat?
For most breed associations and things, a hat or a helmet is required. And I do believe in 4-H, a hat or a helmet is required. But I'd have to check the rule book for sure. But most associations in 4-H and things like that require you to wear a cowboy hat or a helmet, some kind of protection.
And yes, a hat or a helmet is required for Kansas 4-H. And be sure to check out the 4-H horse show rulebook. That will include all the information about dress code. And that is something that as a judge that judges several 4-H shows, we need to make sure that all of our riders are paying attention to what the dress code is, and also paying attention to proper equipment, because there are some things that you can use in speed events that you can't use in Western pleasure.
Yes, certainly. And that's not something that I did talk about tonight, but I know in the 4-H rulebook and things, there are different bits and head stalls and different things like that that are illegal and so forth. So you have to make sure that you're checking the rule book no matter where you're going to show. Yes, Yvonne. Sometimes it shows, depending on the weather, we can make some changes based on that. So I've been to some shows where some local outside shows. If the wind is just absolutely brutal, the judge can make that exception to not have hats. Yes.
Okay, any other last minute questions for Dr. Crabtree? Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and end tonight. Once again, I will email the recording out to everyone who pre-registered for this. And also it's available on the Kansas 4-H website, same place where you would have registered to receive tonight's Zoom link. Once again, these webinars are held monthly, the third Monday of each month at 7 p.m. They are all recorded. So if you happen to see one and you miss it, you haven't missed it forever. We do record them and they're available for you to watch at a later date. You're not required to watch them live. And this might be one of the biggest groups we've had so far. So Dr. Crabtree, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, and good luck to all of you who are exhibiting at the State Fair next month. And we will see you all soon.